Hello, everybody. Michael Kumare with Xiting. Thanks for joining us for a webinar today. For a change, it's not going to be me talking, but Alessandro, my boss. So he's going to be talking about RFCs and how to reauthorize RFC interfaces and what the security implications are in terms of GDPR and other issues. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping items that I would like to share with you. One is we'll be recording this webinar. It's recording already, so you will be receiving an email directly from GoToWebinar within 24 hours with a link to the recording. I'll also be sending out a YouTube link for some people. The web player at GoToWebinar offers doesn't always work, so you'll get a YouTube link as well. If you have any questions, there is a questions box in the GoToWebinar control panel, and I would like you to use that, please. So just type in your question, and I'll keep an eye on those questions and answer them during the webinar. And then at the end, depending on how much time we have left, we'll read out some of those questions, and Alessandro or I will answer them. We also have two polls throughout the webinar, so I'd appreciate if you participated. The more participation, the better the results are, and we can all gauge kind of how where we stand with our RFCs. And there are also two PDFs or handouts attached to the GoToWebinar control panel. So if you click on that handout thing, it folds out, and then you can download the two PDFs. One, I assume, Alessandro, is a copy of the slide deck, and the other one is an OSS note where SAP recommends certain tools that you can use to redesign RFC interfaces. And with that said, I'm going to hand it over to you, Alessandro. And again, thanks for joining us for this webinar today.
Thank you, Michael. Good afternoon, everyone. Alessandro Banzer here with Xiting. Today, we're going to talk about how to redesign RFC interfaces, as Michael already mentioned. We want to go through a SAP Note that recommends using certain automation tools. I have the SAP Note here in the title as well. But before we go into the tools and before we go into looking into more details how to redesign RFCs, we just want to get a little bit of an understanding of what are RFCs, why it is so complicated to authorize RFCs. Talking about some tools from SAP, Yukon, for example, Unified Connectivity. We'll see how that plays into redesigning, or how it plays into using and protecting RFCs. Let me just jump on the next slide here from the agenda today. So first, I'll kind of give a little bit of an introduction, who we are, who is Xiting, why we're talking here. Then, as I said, I will start introducing the topic. We go and look into RFCs and Yukon, and then we go and jump into the topic of how we can redesign RFCs. What are the challenges? What are the implications when we do RFC designs? Why is it so cumbersome? Why do a lot of customers shy away from redesigning RFCs? And then also not just how we can do it, but also what tools are available to automate the entire process, how we can take risk away, and how we can automate certain tasks that are part of an RFC redesign. And then at the end, we should have a couple of minutes left for questions. Again, as Michael mentioned, just use the control panel where you can type in the questions, and Michael will, throughout the webinar, he will try to answer as many as he can already. With that being said, just a few words about myself. Again, my name is Alessandro Banzer. A few of you might know me from the SAP community. I'm a very active member, especially on the GRC area. So I do a lot of GRC consulting, but also, authorization management in general, security tasks. It's always involved, always goes hand in hand with GRC, with authorizations. And then also we do, where I specialize in is our own tool, that's the Xiting Authorizations Management Suite. We will see that in a little bit later. I'm a co-author of the SAP System Security Guide that was just released last year by SAP Press. If you want to learn more about system security in general, that's a very good read. I also do educational trainings for SAP. So when SAP offers trainings, for example, here in the United States for GRC authorizations, Fiori authorizations, advanced authorizations, those are the ones I'm teaching. So we might talk in one of those trainings as well. I have my contact details here. So if you have any questions that are not answered during the call, during the webinar, just feel free to reach out, my email or my phone number here. And you should always be able to reach me, especially by email. A few words about Xiting. We were founded back in 2008 by cybersecurity experts. We are still, or we're founded in Europe. We're headquartered in Switzerland. We have 70 plus employees. We have offices all over the world. We're growing. We're expanding. We're in very heavily in Germany and Switzerland, but then also in the United Kingdom, in England. We're in Romania, and we're also in the United States as of 2016. So we're fairly new to the market here in the US. But again, it's almost 3 years, so we have, getting attention, and we're known in the market. Most of, or pretty much all of our senior consultants are also SAP trainers. That's what I mentioned earlier. We have a very good relationship with SAP. We're a SAP Silver partner, but then we're also an SAP education partner. So we do a lot of the trainings for SAP, and that's usually our senior consultants that step up and provide the trainings for SAP. That's mainly in the area of basis, security, authorizations, GRC, IDM, signals, and so on. So pretty much all the entire area of security. With that being said, let's just jump right into the topic. We want to talk about RFCs. What is always a challenge? And I wanted to start here with a little bit of a messy slide. I apologize for that. But we all know we have multiple and various different system landscape. You might not have every single one that I mentioned here, like an ERP, that's usually the central system every customer has. But then we have other systems like customer relation, CRM, we have HR systems, we have business intelligence, and so on. We have GRC systems, we have maybe a CUA, we have solution manager, we have multiple different types of systems in our landscape. And all those systems, they talk to each other. They might not talk to every single one, but the majority will talk, and we will exchange data between the systems. And I have mentioned a couple of things here, like for example, customer master data, vendor master data, cost center, work orders, purchase orders, and so on, user master. That's all data that's being shared and exchanged across various landscapes. And so that's always happening through, very likely happening through RFC communication. So systems are communicating and exchanging data. And that data exchange, needs to be protected. That we will see in just a little bit. But just from a big picture, every customer that runs SAP has very likely a lot of interfaces, and those interfaces are always at risk. When we talk about different landscapes, for example, SAP ERP, I have here ERP, we not only have one ERP system, we have a dev system, we have a quality system, we have prod system, we might have integration testing, we might have a sandbox, we have not only a prod and a dev and a quality, for example, but we have within one system, we have multiple clients. You have a client 000, we have a client 066, which is early watch. Then we have our golden clients. That can be client 100, can be client 001, or we have multiple productive clients or clients that we use within one system. So we have a lot of, not only one system, but then also multiple clients within one system. And then, for example, here I just have one example with the CUA, which is the Central User Administration that a lot of customers use, or can be GRC or Solman. That's connected to not only the ERP, but then also within the ERP landscape to a dev, to a quality, to a prod system, and to various clients within those systems. So there's a lot of communication happening, and not just because we have two landscapes, it's not just two connections, there are a lot of connections because we have multiple clients and then also multiple tiers within a landscape. So there's a lot of communication happening, a lot of data being exchanged in our landscape. I just wanted to start because when systems communicate with each other, they communicate through function modules. In a SAP NetViewer, in the ABAP stack, there's roughly 85,000 function modules that are there. If we install a SAP ERP on the latest enhancement package, there's close to more than 500,000 that are defined in the system. So here, first polling question, it's always interesting to see, what do you think? How many of those do you think are remote enabled? So how many, and remote enabled is function modules that can be called from outside the system. So I can call a function module from one system, but then execute it in the other system. What do you think, how many are there? We just give it a second here to see. I can see 30% already voted. So the tendency goes pretty high. A lot of people think it's 47,000 or 407,000. To be exact, let me just jump here on the slide. So on the ABAP stack, that's just the ABAP stack itself, there's more than 16,000 remote enabled function modules available. When we look into an ERP, it's more than 45,000. So I just put 47,000 in the polling. So it's a lot of function modules that are out there that need to be properly authorized, because we don't know the function modules on top of our head. So we have to kind of, figure, or we have to properly authorize them, even though we don't necessarily know what every single one exactly does. That's a big challenge, and it's always very difficult to properly authorize it. That's why a lot of customers shy away, because we don't necessarily know what to do. When we talk about an RFC hardening project, and we have to redesign our RFCs because they run on SAP All, and a lot of customers, they run on SAP All just because we don't know better. One solution by SAP is called Unified Connectivity, UCON. You might have heard of that. We just wanted to include it here in the webinar as well. So UCON is a tool that's free of charge, is available since release 740. That can be enabled by customers. So per default, it's disabled, but every customer that runs 740 or higher can enable UCON. And UCON is basically nothing else than a firewall. So we can define, based on either a white or a blacklist, we can allow all function modules to be called, or we can exclude certain ones, or we can just whitelist certain function modules that are being used. But it's nothing more than that. It's just either we're just saying we can use it or we cannot, and that needs to be done per client, per system. So we have to do it in the entire landscape. So at the end of the day, we have to consider all our systems so that UCON is effective. On top of that, there is no protection for individual users. So if we allow one function module in one system, that one is allowed for every user. So then we still have to handle and take care of our authorizations. So it's more complementary to authorizations, but it does not replace the authorizations. That's why we have it highlighted here. It really complements authorizations, but it doesn't take away the need to redesign and to harden our RFC users properly. So how does that work? I have just an easy example here. We have function modules here on the left-hand side, for example, BAP user change, RFC ping, might also be like custom one. And with UCON, we can just say, okay, we allow it or we don't. So for example, BAP user change and RFC ping is allowed, but then my custom one, we block. And that we have to do if we, for example, if we follow a whitelist approach, then we have to whitelist all the ones we want to allow. If we follow a blacklist, then we have to, kind of blacklist the ones we don't want to allow. Now, the difficulty here is there are 45,000 or so in a SAP ERP. So how do we know which one is required and which one is not? How do we know which one is difficult or poses a risk or not? So it's very, very difficult to really properly implement and design a UCON. It's possible, but still it requires a lot of investigation to see what needs to be done. If we activate UCON, it's, as I mentioned, it complements the authorization. So here on the right-hand side where I have the flow chart. So basically the first check will be if we do a function module call, a remote function module call into a system, it will check whether it's whitelisted, whether it's allowed to execute. If not, we will have no access. But if it's allowed, then it goes regularly, as always. It does an authorization check. So it checks the user's authorization, whether the user is allowed to execute the function module or not. So it's really, it's complementary. It doesn't take away the need to deal with the authorizations for our RFC users. The most important, or the conclusion for UCON, we can activate UCON, but it only complements the authorization. So we have to deal and we have to consider and we have to talk about the authorization, what is required, what authorization do we grant for our RFC users and what not. UCON will not protect our system from an attack, for example, because certain function modules are required, and if we can exploit them, and I will show an example later, I'll do a quick demo later of one exploit. just Yukon alone by itself will not secure our system. So we always have to deal with the authorizations, and that's what I want to get into here. When we talk about authorizations, authorizing, not only authorizing our end users, our actual users in the system, but also our RFCs, that now is very much driven by data protection regulations, especially when we look into Europe with the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation for the European Union, or even other ones. In California, there was one released, and also other countries and other states are following GDPR to protect that companies have to protect personal information. In SAP, there's a lot of personal information, and I have a few ones mentioned here. When we think about that, like a real person, we have first, last name, date of birth, addresses. We have social security numbers. When we think about our employees, we have pay information, sick information, a lot of things that are very personal that needs to be protected, not only under GDPR but also under other regulations. And a lot of SAP systems, as I showed earlier, that they exchange those information, so they exchange customer information. When we think about a CRM, we're exchanging customer master data from a CRM to our ERP because it's required, but we have to protect that. But also when we think about the CUA or an identity management or GRC, where we, for example, create users or provision users, or we exchange user master, that also needs to be protected. So according to GDPR and other regulations, all organizations must follow certain protection for those information. So there's really a compliance issue, and it's usually very compliance driven to properly authorize RFCs. So what do we do, or what can we do? For what a lot of customers have, where it's always very cumbersome and very difficult to find out what kind of data is being exchanged, because a lot of customers have a lot of custom code. So we have custom interfaces, custom reports, everything is custom. A lot of things are custom, but we don't really know what it's doing. So that's something we always have to look into. We have to see what is custom code doing. Then once we know what are the interface doing, so not just in the custom code, but also for SAP standard, once we know what the interface, for example, is exchanging, what type of data is being exchanged, we can then go ahead and build proper roles and authorizations. So per interface, for example, per function, we would build proper roles in SAP standard and following SAP's best practice approach to build roles. So basically what we do is we want to harden our interfaces so that they have kind of like a least privilege principle approach. They only are allowed to do what they're supposed to do and not more. And then we also want to document that properly, especially with GDPR. We now also have the need to document RFC interfaces, for example, how they're authorized, what data is being exchanged. The big one for most customers is always the validation and the testing of the new role design, especially because a lot of interfaces, they might only exist in production. And we cannot really test that in our dev system. So it's very difficult, very cumbersome to validate and test the new role design. And we will see in just a little bit how that's possible with automation tool, how we can take away the difficulty and the risk with testing and deauthorizing RFC interfaces. And then also on an ongoing basis, we're not just creating, or we're not just doing an RFC hardening project and then we forget about it. Also on an ongoing basis, we want to make sure that we don't deteriorate from our design, so that we stay in sync. We don't reintroduce SAP all, for example. And so on an ongoing basis, we have a continuous security strategy that's also properly documented. So that's usually what we have to do. Again, the challenges are, as I mentioned already, pretty much all our interfaces run on SAP all. So taking away SAP all is a risk, because we never know what happens if we take it away. Manually reauthorizing RFCs is very time consuming, it's very cumbersome, and it's very difficult to do because we don't necessarily know what the RFC is doing. It's difficult. I mean, certainly we can trace RFCs, but in a huge landscape where we have thousands of RFCs, it's difficult to trace every single one. And then again, as I mentioned, test environments don't reflect the RFCs in production. I mentioned the bank connection. if you have a connection to Wells Fargo or Bank of America, we only have that in production. We cannot do a dry run in dev because there is no, there's no test bank. So certain things can only be tested in prod, and hence it's very difficult to just take SAP all away and do a test, because if it breaks, it breaks. What's usually missing is proper authorization proposals. I mentioned SC24 here. So for those of you that are not familiar with SC24, SC24 is the authorization proposal database that's used by PFCG. So when we go into PFCG and we build a role, we get authorization proposals, and that those proposals, they come from SC24. So when we put a transaction or a function module into the role menu, then PFCG will go into SC24 and bring in all the values that are maintained to that function module, that transaction. So it's the the proposal database. And function modules, when we talk about RFC users where we have to authorize function modules primarily, they're not always having proper proposals, so we have also to deal with that. And not a lot of customers use SC24 to build roles for RFCs. So we'll see also what that means. So since there's a lot of risk involved and it's difficult to do, a lot of customers, what they do is they just use SAP all because it works. We don't know better, so we set up a new system and we don't know what's required, so we just put SAP all on the interface and we let it run. No one complains because it's working. The problem is it's a huge risk, and luckily there's a solution, and now I want to go and show you what's the solution. We have another polling question here. It's just always interesting to see how many of you run RFCs on SAP all. It's usually a very high number that runs SAP all or similar authorizations, like a custom role that follows SAP all. And we can see here the tendency is already for like 70%, close to 70% is already at yes. So it's a lot of you run on SAP all. And that's common, so that's nothing. Don't be ashamed just because it's a lot, but that's usually how it looks. So we see here 67%. It's a lot of you that run SAP all, and that's probably the reason why you're attending the webinar. You want to see a solution how we can get rid of that. So let's just jump right into it. Unless Michael has a question, then you just interrupt.
I do not.
Okay, perfect. I want to just give a quick demo here.
Sorry, did you ask if I have a question, or if there is a question? Because there is one that we could bring up real quick.
Okay, bring it up.
And that is around Yukon. So does Yukon check only authorizations, or does it check authorizations or only authentication?
So Yukon again is just a firewall. It doesn't check any authorizations. The authorizations are still checked. So it's just complementing the authorizations. If we activate Yukon, the authorization check is not going away. So the first check is just whether the function module is allowed or not. And if it is not allowed, then the user cannot execute it. If it is allowed, then it goes into the authorization check. And then the user, the RFC user that calls the remote function module, still has to have the authorization to execute. And if the user doesn't have the authorization, it cannot execute. But Yukon by itself it's not checking authorizations. It's just white black. It's just either or. It's 0 or 1. Either you have either you can start the function module or you cannot. But that's not based on authorizations. That's just based on the white or black list that we can define as part of the Yukon implementation. So it's really something we have to actively define what function modules can be used and what not. I hope that answers the question. Perfect. I wanted to show a quick example. I just wanted to jump into a system, a very easy one. You might have seen it already. I apologize if it's boring for you, but a lot of people usually don't know how easily it can be to exploit an RFC. So I'm just trying to remove my control panel here because it's in my way to click. Yep. So when I'm in a test system, it's my XAC system. It's just a test system. Just imagine it's a sandbox system, and I want to gain access to an ERP system. So I want to gain access to, for example, my XIE, which is my ERP system. Unfortunately, my company did not give me access because, for whatever reason, I don't get proper access. But in my sandbox or in my test system here, I have a lot of access. They gave me SAP all because it's just a test system. But luckily, there's an anime SM59 where we can maintain RFC connections. Luckily, there is an RFC here into XIE, and that's the one here that has, that's a connection to my XIE system. That's my XIE system here, for example. And I can see here, there's a user maintained with a password. So again, I'm in my sandbox here. I got a lot of authorizations. I can do an authorization test to see if the system, if the connection works, if the user is not locked, and I can see everything is working. So the connection to my XIE system, which is my ERP, is working. So now what I want to do is I just try a remote logon. Unfortunately, it doesn't work. The reason for that is because the user here is of type system. That's how RFC users should be defined. It's a system user, and system users don't allow GUI logon, so I cannot use the remote logon. Since I know my colleagues in basis and in security, they do a bad job. They just configure or they set up the users with SAP all. I know it's running on SAP all. So what I can do, and I just Googled a little bit and I found out there's a function module I can use. So I go in my test in my sandbox system to SE37, where we can see function modules, and there's a function module called BAPI user change. So that's a function module that's, for example, used by the CUA. Then we change user. So that BAPI user change, if we open it, just hit here display. And I'm just picking one here. That's a BAPI user change. That's the change user BAPI. There's also one for to create users, to assign roles, to assign profiles. There are multiple BAPIs available that we can use. I just want to use the BAPI user change. And we can see here the BAPI user change is a remote enabled function module. And it has to be because, with CUA, we have a central user administration. We want to, create and change users in our remote system. So it must be remote enabled. So what I can do here, and that's something, you either know or you don't, but there are blogs out there that explain that. So now what we want to do is we want to change that RFC user in our ERP system. So when I jump back to my SM59, we know that's the RFC destination. That's the one we want to use. So we want to call the function module in that RFC destination. We want to change a username. Let's just change the RFC user here. I don't want to change my user because that, someone might see that. What I want to do is I just want to change the logon data where I have the U here. That's the user group. Oh, it's now behind my thing. That's the user group, which is now B system. I want to just change it to A for dialog. Then we have to define a flag. That's something you have to know. So there's a flag that it changes the field. So I just put here an X in the user type field. And then I just execute that function module. We can see it's now executed. If I scroll down a little bit, we can see there's one result. And if I go in here, I can see user RFC has been changed. So now the function module run. Let's go back to my SM59. I just closed that one here. That's my SM59. That's the user. Now let's try to do a remote logon. I hit remote logon. And now what we can see is the SAP GUI now started. And we can now see I'm in system XIE, which is my ERP, and I'm logged on with my RFC user. The best thing now, now here I'm in XIE, so I'm in the ERP, and I can now in here do whatever I want because that user here, the RFC user, we can see it's running on SAP all, as I was assuming. The best thing about it, if I go to the change documents, because someone might say, hey, why is it a dialog user? They go to change documents, and then we check for the user type. And if we look here, we can see that we changed it from B to A, so from system user to dialog user. But the best thing is the user that changed it was the RFC user himself. So it doesn't say Alessandro Banzer. It's really the change happened in the context of that RFC user here. And now I'm in my ERP system with SAP all, and I can do whatever I want. I can create users. I can do whatever I want. I have SAP all. And this is just a very quick example of, if you have interfaces there that are not properly protected, because maybe, should not have the authorization to change users, to create users. And that's also why it's so important to not only consider authorizations in your prod and in your golden client, but then also in all the connected systems. Because ultimately, if I get into a sandbox and I have SAP all, and there's a connection to prod, as I was just showing, I'm in prod with SAP all. And that's why it's so important that we talk about RFC authorizations and properly authorize our RFC users. Again, just a very quick example, you might have seen it before, but that's how easy it can be to gain access to a prod system, a critical system, you know, if you don't have our authorizations under control. And not only in prod, but also in our sandboxes, in our dev systems, in our quality systems, in the GRC environment, and so on. But everywhere where we have connections between systems, we have to have authorizations under control. And that's true for RFC users, but then also for our dialog users, because ultimately, if I have authorization to run SM59 or SC38, then I can execute the function module. If I don't have the authorization, I don't know the information, it might be a little bit more difficult. So I mentioned earlier there's a solution, and that's why we called the webinar SAP Note 16.82316. There's a SAP Note from SAP Consulting that talks about how to optimize RFC users. And whenever SAP Consulting optimize RFC users, they use a tool called the Xiting Authorizations Management Suite. That's ultimately a tool or a suite of tools from my company. So that's why we're here and show you how we can use, or how you can use the XMS to redesign your RFC users, not only your RFC, but also your dialog users, every authorization in your SAP system pretty much. The XMS, we call it short XMS. It's a little shorter than the full name. Is again, as I mentioned, a suite of tools. It comes with 7 modules. We do various things. We simplify role designs, role maintenance, role testing. So we have a solution called the productive test simulation, or short PTS. I'll show that in just a little bit, where we can take away the traditional user testing. We do code scanning, so we can scan your custom code, we can scan partner code, SAP standard code, and we also can create security concepts and then validate security concepts on an ongoing basis. A lot of things that can be done within the XMS, so that XMS simplifies and automates for us. So when we talk about RFC redesign, when we go into RFC hardening, the very first thing, when we always when we talk about authorizations, building new roles, be it for dialog users, be it for RFC users, for batch users, it doesn't really matter. The first thing we always want to do is to optimize SC24. As I mentioned, SC24 is the authorization proposal database by SAP. So when we go into PFCG and we build a role, and we build it properly, and as best practice recommendation by SAP to build roles through the role menu, then we get the proposals from SC24. So to build the roles very sustainably, we have to use SC24 values. Unfortunately, not all the authorizations which are required by a transaction or by a function module are properly proposed. So that's why the first thing we always do, that's why we have a code scanner, is to scan the code. For example, I have one function module here that I just scanned, and then we can check what are the authorization checks that are happening. That's one thing that we have to know. But then also we can compare the authorization checks against SC24. So I can see, for example, here for that RFC ABAP install and run, that's a function module here, just one example. That, for example, checks for object as develop, field activity, and value 01, which is properly proposed in SC24. So we can see the object is maintained, the field is maintained, and the value is maintained. For others, like here on the second line, where we have the change authorization 02, the value is not maintained. So that's why we have that symbol here that says value is missing. In other instances, for example, here ST code TCD, ST38, here we don't even have the ST code proposed. That might be okay, it's just showing it here. And so what we can do here, if you have missing proposals, so for example, if you want to maintain 02, for example, we can just double click the update button, and then it writes the change on a transport, uses SAP standard procedures to update SC24, and we have updated SC24. So that's always the very first thing you want to do, regardless if you want to do it with a tool like I'm showing here, you can do it manually. But the first thing is always to do an SC24 optimization to get the proper proposals when we go into the role building. So one thing we do is we do code scanning. That's why we use our tool. We have a code scanner. where we can scan all the function modules, for example, and optimize SAP semi-automatically directly from here. Then when we talk about function modules, what we also do, for function modules, we need like fugger or func that needs to be proposed properly. We can also check for those. So all the function modules that were utilized, when we authorize them is the RFC object. We either need the function group, which is fugger, or the function module name, which is the func field, and that also can be properly proposed in SAP. So we have other reports that do that. So we have a whole bunch of reports to optimize SAP. And it's always the same thing here. We have like a traffic light approach where green is fine, red is missing or wrong. So we can not only tell you if it's missing, for example, but also if there's a stop sign here, that there's a wrong value maintained, which is even worse, because if there's a wrong value maintained, that means there's a proposal there. So if you go into PFCG and we go into the authorization data, a value is coming up, but that value is wrong, it's not working. So when we go into testing, we can see it's a wrong value, and then we go in and change. And that ultimately then results in a changed authorization, and we don't want to have that. So we want to have proper proposals, and that's what we can automatically check here for all our function modules, for example, but also for our transactions and so on. So that's always the very first step, is to optimize SAP. Then the next step, and for that I want to jump into the system. I have an animated GIF here, a picture that shows you what we can do, but I want to jump right into the system and show you how we can very easily build the new role design. Let me just jump to my system. So we have a module called the role designer, and the role designer is a very interactive tool where we can use drag and drop functionality to build our role design. So we have 3 views here, and I just started already. So on the left-hand side, we see all our usage data that comes from SD03N, where we can see all our RFC users, for example, what they executed. On the right-hand side here, we have our users, so our RFC users. And then in the middle section, we have our virtual roles. So those are virtual roles. They don't exist in PFCG right now. They only exist in the project here. So what I can do here, I can slice and dice the information on the left-hand side. So those are the functions that are being executed by my users. If I, for example, I want to see, I want to group them by calling users, so I can see for one particular user what they executed. For example, my GRC user, I can see the GRC user executed all those function modules. So those are GRC related, but then also, for example, the RFC ping. Now what I can do here, I can just select whatever I want here, or multiple, or I can just do one by one, or I just select everything, and then I can use drag and drop and create a role here. So I just hover over, create new role, go in here and say, okay, I'm now creating a GRC backend role. Hit OK here, and now we can see here we have a role created that contains the function modules. What I can also do here, I can use description and long text. So if I want to say role for GRC RFC user, I can put descriptions in, long text in, and so on. What's also very good what we can do here, and that helps us a lot when we look at the GRC user here, we can see there's the GRC RFC user used 28 function modules. If I double click, I can see the ones that he used. And I can see that there's a percentage coverage of 0% because there's no role assigned right now. And now what I can also do, the virtual role, which again doesn't exist in PFCG, I can drag and drop it over to my GRC user. And then I can see I have one virtual role assignment that covers the user 100%, because I just used the user here, all the authorization here, or the function that he executed, dragged it over and dragged it over here. So that must result in 100%. So that's how easily we can build the role design here. So I can build CUA roles, IDM roles, based on the usage data, based on information I have from other sources as well. What's even better here is we can go into reporting view and then analyze the roles before they even exist in PFCG. For example, if you want to see it leads to GDPR access. So if I have my GRC role here that doesn't exist in PFCG yet, we can, for example, analyze it against our own rule set, or we can, for example, reach out to SAP GRC access control and check for critical functions or combinations. So if you have a GDPR rule set, for example, we can check and see if that leads to authorizations that has authorization to see customer master data, for example, and so on. So we can run a check here. I just do one here against our own rule set. We have a GDPR rule set. And then, we can see we don't get any results back. So it means there's no critical authorizations in regards of GDPR here, for example, for a GRC user. If there would be some, then we would see it here. So right now the role is in a virtual state, doesn't exist in PFCG just yet. Now we have all our roles here. Everything looks good. We want to go ahead and go into testing. Before we can test the role, it has to exist in PFCG. So we have to still finalize the role. So how do we do that? So here we can just press a button, create selected roles in PFCG. I just click that here. It tells me if I want to override, if it exists. I say yes. It doesn't yet. If I want to replace the text with the designer text that I maintained here in the project, I say yes. And then we can see the role designer created a role in PFCG. And if I now refresh the screen, we can also see that the button here, the green light here for PFCG now turned green basically, and we have the role in PFCG. And if I now double click, we go out to PFCG, and then we can see that the text that I maintained is the description text here, but more importantly, the role that I created for a GRC backend now comes with all the function modules that are required by the RFC user. And since we did SO24 optimization, when we go into the authorization data and we do the read all, or we read in and merge the SO24 values, we can see we now have proper proposals that are required by those function modules. So those are now the values that come from SO24. Why is that important? Because in the role we have a very used list that's now for traceability. If you want to see, or transparency, if you want to see why certain authorizations are in here. So why do we have access? Why do we give access to STabudis for a table authorization group? We can just click the very used list, and then we can see from which function module that authorization comes from. So we can see RFC ping requires access to that table authorization group here. And now we have a full transparency from authorizations back to our function modules. And that's why it's so important that we use S24 proposals so that we have that relationship, the link between authorization values or objects to our function modules. And that's why it's so important, if I go back out here, that we build the roles through the role menu. And that's not only true for our dialog users, that's also true for our RFC users, because only then we get all the proposals. Otherwise, we go into the authorization and then we just play around with SRFC, put a star in there. We don't want to have that. That's why we want to use proper proposals. I just keep going on the slides. That's just what I showed you earlier when we run a check. Here I checked another role, for example. That's just how it would look like if there's, for example, an issue with GDPR or critical functions and so on. So we can basically validate that virtual design that we have, the virtual role, which doesn't exist in PFCG. We can already analyze it. So before we build a role in PFCG, we can already see, if there's authorizations in there that lead to access, that allows me to access, for example, GDPR customer objects that are under GDPR need to be protected. Hope that makes sense. Again, here, that's the role menu based how we want to build it. So we get all the proposals properly. It was just what I showed you here, just here on the slides as well. The very used list just showed that as well. And then once we have that role built and we have PFCG roles and we want to go out and test that, again, as I mentioned earlier, testing is very cumbersome, very, very difficult. So we have a solution called the productive test simulation, where we use the SAP standard reference user to test our interfaces. So how does that look like? It's like a backpack concept. So we have our technical user that runs on SAP all. We don't want to touch that. We don't want to take SAP all away when we test roles. So what we do is we use the SAP standard reference user, and we assign our new role to the reference user. Then we make an assignment from the reference user to the technical user. So our RFC user, which is technical user, runs on SAP all, but then in the backpack, so the reference user has the new roles. So why do we do that? Whenever there's an authorization check by the SAP kernel, it checks first the authorizations of the reference user. And if it fails here, it tries again against the RFC user. And if it passes, then the return code is 0. So why is that important? If we build a new role that, very specifically for example, our GRC, RFC, that lacks authorizations because we missed something or we didn't know what to put into the authorizations, it will fail against the reference user, so to say the backpack, but it will pass against the RFC user. Very important, the RFC user can still continue to execute the function model. It will not get stuck, so the interface will not go down. But with our tool, we can now monitor what is failing against the reference user, and that's our delta. So with that, we can now see what is missing in the new role that we created for the RFC users, for our RFC user that's now assigned through the reference user. And again, most important, the RFC still running on SAP all and will not fail, will not go down. We have then like a monitoring. So when we do PTS, our productive test simulation, we let that run for a couple of weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, however long we want to. And we only have to monitor the log file in the background. So the interface will run, will just work. And then once a week, we go in and we monitor what is failing against our newly created role, so against the reference user. And that's then what we get here as a log file. That's very messy. You don't have to understand what's happening here. But basically, we now get back all the authorizations that failed against the new role that's, and would break the RFC if not assigned properly. So that's now what we have to do with the tool is just monitoring the PTS over a period of 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 2 months, however long we want to do it, we just monitor it. And that takes a couple of hours, maybe a week. We'll get less and less if we finalize and maintain the role. But that's still what we have to do. But the tool really simplifies that whole monitoring process. Not only does it tell us what is failing, we can then also compare it against S24. So we can, from here then, and here I have just a couple of transactions like S01 or S93, we can then see in S24 whether the object, the field, or the value is maintained or not. So because again, we want to maintain the roles to S24. So, when we change something, we change it in S24 and then we update the role and read old, merge new. We merge in the new authorizations, the new proposals from S24. And that way we finalize the role design. I hope that makes sense. So everything always goes through S24 when we want to maintain values. Once our role design is finalized, once we're happy with the testing, once we have no more authorization issues, we can go into the go live. So we take SAP all away and we assign the new role. There's always a remaining risk, even though it's very, very low. We usually, when we do project, there's no authorization issues because the interface was tested over a couple of months, for example, and the backpack scenario captures everything. There's nothing that falls through. But let's say there's something that wasn't tested for whatever reason. What we have is a solution called automatic delta role generation. It follows pretty much the same or a similar principle. So what is basically happening is if the interface performs an authorization check here on the left-hand side against our technical user that now runs with the new role that we specifically created for that interface. And let's assume something is failing for whatever reason. Within a split second, the XAMS, our tool, is picking up that failed authorization check, puts it into a delta role, just a PFCG role, everything manually inserted, and assigns that role to the interface user. So kind of like a delta role. So basically like a backpack to our RFC user. Interfaces are usually designed the way if they fail, they try again. Maybe 2 seconds, 5 seconds later, they try again. That's usually how good interfaces are designed. So since that happens within a split second, so less than 1 second, the role is created and assigned. When the interface a second later tries again, the authorization is now there, and then the authorization check passes, and the interface will run. So with that, we can mitigate the last the last risk we have, even though there's usually no issues. But if there's really something, we can mitigate that reminder of a risk with our delta role generation that instantly creates a role, assigns it to the interface user directly in production, and we only allow that for our RFCs, for example, just to make sure the interface doesn't go down. That's the ultimate reason why we do that, just that the business is not interrupted. So that's also, kind of like a fallback solution in case we miss something during the role design and during the testing of our interfaces. With that being said, in a nutshell, I was showing you how we can use the tool to redesign and automate and simplify the whole RFC redesign task that we have. A little more about the XMS as a tool. Again, it's a third-party tool. It's fully built in ABAP. It's an ABAP-based application. It can be licensed based on a user or project based. So, if you have 100 RFC users and the project duration is 6 months, you can just rent or subscribe to the tool for 6 months for your 100 RFC users, for example. So we either do subscriptions, or you can also perpetual license. If you want to buy the tool, you can also buy that. That's more, we see more for dialogue users. If you want to have the tool for your entire landscape to redesign authorizations. We have standard maintenance and support agreements, so straightforward like SAP, and everything is dedicated in a partner table and namespace. So we're not touching any SAP standard functionality. Everything is now our own table and namespace. Easy transport in, easy transport out, and that's why we have those short-term subscriptions, for example, for a project, 6 months or so, just in and out, very easy, and very easy in handling the logistics to install the tool. To wrap it up, because I'm a little short on time, so I have more time left. So what I was showing you is when we define or design roles for RFCs, what's very important is to use SAP's best practice for role design. And that's basically building roles through the role menu and then using SAP for all the proposals. Because in case there's a function module that changes during an upgrade, so let's say you upgrade your system, implement an enhancement package, or you go to S/4HANA, whatever the case might be, there might be a risk that SAP changes the function module, and that function module requires new authorization now. We don't know that. SAP delivers the change in authorizations through S/25. Basically, we can update our S/24, and then we get to know the change when we do the S/25 steps after an upgrade. And then we have to go back into the roles and merge the old authorizations with the new authorizations. And that's why we have to use S/24. So in case there's a change in a function module, authorizations for a function module, we get to know that through S/25, and then we can update our roles. And that's how we can make sure that we have a sustainable role design. Also, other things I mentioned when we look into compliance, when we have properly built roles through the menu with S/24, we have the transparency. We can see we have the link from authorization object field values back to our function module, for example. So I know exactly why certain authorizations came into the role in the first place. That's very important to have that link as well. When we do redesigns, we definitely wanna use this historical usage data. So we use SD03N. You can use that yourself as well, where we can see all the function modules being used by our RFCs. Most importantly, what we can ensure with the tool is that we have no disruption to business processes. So with the test validation, the productive test simulation, our PTS scenario, we can make sure there's no disruption to business, that no interface will go down. There will be no issue whatsoever, because we can do, again, back testing for a couple of months. And then even when we go live, we have a fallback in case we miss something, which is very unlikely, but there's always a remaining risk, but that we can also mitigate. With the tool, there's a significant cost and time savings. So we claim to save up to 70% of effort when we use the tool, because the tool automates a lot. I just showed you one very specific thing with the role designer, is a drag and drop. And I think you already saw how easy it is and how simple, and just that alone will save a lot of time. But there's a ton of other functionality as well that, due to the time restrictions, I couldn't show you. but there's a lot of time savings as well, involved as well. Again, RFC hardening projects and redesigns, it's usually a remediation step for audit issues because we have SAP all in our interfaces. It's an audit compliant. We want to remediate. We have to do something. That's definitely something that we want to achieve, and that's why a lot of customers have to redesign. And then also, last but not least, I think for the ongoing, for the maintenance part of it, you know, with a solid role design, when we use S24, when we follow best practice, we have improved maintainability, sustainability also in our roles. So, you know, role maintenance will be significantly easier going forward when we have it properly built. If you want to learn more, there's a couple of resources here. I mean, I mentioned the SAP Note already. We have a stock take tool. If you're interested in redesigning and you want to know what's the effort, we have a tool that you can download. It's just one report that you can put into SA38 and run. That will analyze your RFC, so actually your entire landscape. And then based on that information, we can give you a ballpark number, how long it will take you to do the redesign. Either if you do it yourself or you use a tool or you use us as a solution provider, we will just tell you what is the effort to redesign your entire landscape. That's a very good thing if you just want to see what's the damage and, you know, how much does it take you. Again, if you're unable to do it yourself, we also offer redesign services. You do it at a flat rate because we know exactly, based on our stock take tool, we know exactly how long it will take us. We will be very transparent about that, so you know what you get, and for that we have a service that we can also sell directly to our clients. If you want to learn more, we have a couple of case studies available on our homepage. So if you just follow that link here, we can read a case study about Siemens and Audi. They did RFC redesigns. I think the Siemens one, it's a very interesting one. You know, they did 20 productive clients within 11 months, which is for an organization the size of Siemens, pretty good. But then also with Audi and so on, or Bosch, how they use the tools, how they automated. Very good case studies to read up on. If you want to have a reference call with one of our customers, just reach out to us. We can also make the connection here if you want to talk to one of our clients. With that being said, I think I'm good on time. I've got 3 minutes left, so let's see if we have some questions here, Michael.
You were supposed to leave 15 minutes for questions, but that's fine. Yeah, there are actually a ton of questions, so we're not going to get to all of them, but I promise we'll answer them all offline. You know, put them all together into a spreadsheet, anonymize the spreadsheet, and then send it out to everybody so everyone sees the questions and the corresponding answers. But you know, the ones we can maybe handle in the last 2 minutes or so is about the testing that you've mentioned with the reference user, and you know, and how to handle users in production that have SAP all. So can this be used in production, or is this more for, you know, new interfaces and new users?
Yeah. So even though we call it productive test simulation, we initially built it to test in production. So that's how we use it. For example, we test directly in production, because as I mentioned, certain interfaces only exist in prod. So what we do is we activate the PTS scenario in a productive environment. The RFC user still runs on SAP all, but then we define a reference user, and we assign our new roles that we created and transport up to prod to that reference user. And the reference user then gets assigned to the RFC user. And I mean, I can just maybe jump back here a couple of slides so we can see it once again. One more here. So here, and so that's basically what's happening in prod. So in prod, we have our technical user, RFC user running on SAP all, and the reference user now has that new role that we built. And then we let it run. We let it run for a couple of months, for example, in production, and nothing will fail because the RFC still runs on SAP all. But in the backend, on the backend side, we can now test the new role. So, and when I say test, it's just validating, because whenever the authorization, the SAP kernel performs an authorization check, it does it against the reference user first, and if it fails, it goes against the technical RFC user. And that's why we can always see what's failing here, but then passes here. Basically, it gives a return code 0 because we have SAP all, but what failed here is our delta. And that's what we want to find out. So we want to see what is missing in the new role that we created for that particular user here, for example. without impacting you know, the RFC itself. Maybe Michael, maybe you want to explain it in other words.
No, that's fine. I was just, you know, looking at the time. We're in the top of the hour, so unfortunately we have to wrap it up. But again, we'll answer all those questions. We'll send out an email with all the answers in combination with a copy of the slide deck if you haven't downloaded from the handout yet, and a link to the recording. And of course, if there is anything that you'd like to discuss, you know, just feel free to reach out to us. You can also respond to my email that I'll send all of you, and you know, set up a call and have a chat if there is anything else that you'd like to discuss. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Michael.